you for joining us today. Of everybody who is IRL, welcome to the Pathways to Economic Stability, a lifeline for survivors of gender-based violence. And thank you to our panelists, or the two panelists who are joining us via Zoom. I will introduce myself. I'm Sarah Hayes. I'm the Senior Director of Economic Empowerment Programs at Sanctuary for Families. I'm going to be the moderator of today's panel. And then I will give a moment to our two panelists in person to introduce themselves, and then give the panelists who are on Zoom an opportunity to introduce themselves. So we can start off with you, Taylor.
Hello. My name is Taylor Wedderburn. I'm an intern at Apneop, the organization founded by Ruchira Gupta, who unfortunately cannot be here today, so I will be in her place. Basically, at our organization, we just fight to empower the last girl, which is the girl who has nothing and has been left nothing. And we just hope to have a world where all forms of gender violence and sex trafficking is eradicated.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Maria Meneses. I am a health promoter at Planned Parenthood of Greater New York. We provide services about sexual and reproductive health, and also I help the community members to make an appointment or to receive the
I know. Oh, okay. Balorma, can you hear me now? If you can hear me, why don't you introduce yourself next? Balorma, you're just on mute.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Balorma, and I'm actually founder of Boutique Financial Advisory Services, and we provided consultancy as a part. I'm also chairperson of Women Entrepreneurs Mentor Club, and through our NGO, we provided advisory services for women who are subjected to violence and many other small projects. And I'm hoping that I can contribute to the discussion.
Yes, Vivi, you can go next. Thank you. Thank you, Balorma.
Hi, and welcome. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I'm an academic and a social entrepreneur. I teach at Brown University on gender justice issues, and I founded a nonprofit called Ubuntu at Work. We work in rural communities and a few urban, but mostly rural communities in the poorest parts of the world. And we help the women in those communities empower themselves, gain skills, gain capabilities, and to create communities of support around them.
I think no sound again.
Yeah.
Okay. So,
Mm-hmm.
alrighty. So we'll jump in. We have a number of questions that we're hoping today are going to present all of the attendees with a sense of how large the issue of violence against women is, and how important the intervention of economic empowerment and economic mobility is for those individuals. And I'll, round robin the questions, because I think it's going to help us manage the hybrid nature of today's event. So I'll call on each panelist to hear your answers for each of the questions. And I think I'll start with the panelists who are on Zoom. And then end with the panelists who are here in person. So our first question today is, why is economic empowerment so important for survivors? If you could identify them, what would you say are the biggest challenges that survivors face when attempting to achieve? I think you all can hear me now. Okay, sorry for the echo, but just so that they can hear me. So I'll repeat the question. Why is economic empowerment so important to survivors? What are the biggest challenges survivors face when attempting to achieve economic stability? Viba, why don't you go first?
Okay. Well, let me start by saying that the reason economic empowerment needs to be focused upon, and it's sort of the linchpin of trying to transform different communities and disadvantaged communities and so on, is because economic empowerment helps with the pressures around them. And there's considerable literature on this to suggest that it is indeed the case that when women have assets, when women are able to accrue assets, when women are able to gain skills, it helps them not just respond to the constraints, the immediate constraints they might face, and to alleviate their personal challenges at that moment, but also more broadly and from a long-term perspective, it helps them bargain with the challenges that they face as a group. And so economic empowerment is terribly important. It's an essential stepping stone to helping survivors of poverty, survivors of illnesses and diseases, survivors of sexual violence, of trafficking and so on, just handle their situation much better and to protect themselves against those threats that they might face in the future.
Thank you for that, Viba. Balorma, why don't you
Yes.
offer your thoughts next?
Of course, there is so much literature about why we need to empower women in order to reduce, but also help them to continue, to support their families. Most of the time, victims of whatever violence is actually most in a vulnerable communities and in very difficult economic situations to start with, right? So when the victims of gender violence or human trafficking or anything, they usually the poverty is the source of poverty is actually the main source of all this actions and stress and everything, therefore although we speak a lot about economic empowerment of women in more vulnerable communities, I always feel like there is not enough support, to be honest, right? So most of the support comes a bit too late, a bit too little. And therefore, I think the work that you do, that every woman or NGO, it shouldn't be also only a woman's issue. It has to be actually a community issue. We need to involve the entire community. And therefore, I think it's quite important for us to continue to talk about really empowering women economically. Once woman has a money, once woman has a means of moving, and everything goes back to, do you have your cash in your wallet type of thing, right? So therefore, I think it's just, you can't talk about ending violence without talking how to eradicate poverty, how to create more opportunities in these communities.
Okay, there we go. That's perfect. Thank you so much, Balorma. Let's hear from our panelists in the room. Maria, same question.
Yes, Sarah, thank you. So I want to speak on my perspective and my experience. I am an immigrant. I am a Latina. My first language is Spanish, so we had different barriers with other survivors, but it's very important, the economic empowerment, because especially when we are mothers, we have children. My 2 older children born in Mexico, so I can to get any services or SNAP, for example, for my kids. So, and I know when I try to get services for my kids, what's very hard. The only services we got was insurance. That's very helpful because the health is important. And also, I know the organization, they help the survivors. You know, it's many clients they have, so they can help to us for a long term. It's impossible. So they need to distribute the money with different services, not only for support and economic situation. And I understand that point. But when we don't have an professional education, it's more harder to find a job. I was a housekeeper, I was a cashier, I was a waitress, I was a cooker. Sometimes I cooked food for some Mexican parties, you know, to try to get more money for my family. So this is very important to show the people how can catch the fish, not give the fish, right? Because if they give a fish, we eat in a one seat. So yeah, it's very important because we need to feel free in the different ways. And also, for example, the Human Resources Administration, sometimes I feel it like judgment. When you go to apply for some services, they had a bad treatment to the people. So I feel so bad. At that time, I didn't know about my rights. I have a person to speak my language. So I feel very bad when I went to the office. I was crying all the time when I applied for the services. And the money is very small. We can live with that money in New York City. The rent, the food is very expensive. So we can. Thanks God, my children go to the school and they prepare for the life, and they finish the college, the university. So I feel very thankful we have an organization to give the way, you know, for the better life.
Thank you, Maria. Taylor? It should be.
So the question is, why is economic empowerment so important? And even in our personal lives, why is economic empowerment so important? Like, why did we go to college? Why do we get a job? It's to improve our standard of living and our overall well-being and way of life. And I think that, sorry. So we know that women are unproportionately affected by poverty. And in order to get to a place where they feel safe enough to not only protect themselves, but their families and their assets, I think, it's just very important.
You can have that to Maria. Just thinking about what all the panelists offered, I think that at Sanctuary, you know, in the development of our economic empowerment services, we've also stumbled across the fact that it's not just about survivorship, it's not just about trauma, it's also about poverty, it's also about homelessness, right? You know, to Maria's point of this being an extremely expensive city to survive in, and the fact that, you know, anyone can get just any job, but that doesn't necessarily effectively address the issue, the deep impact of poverty. Like, you're still struggling and subsisting, and depending on your immigration status, you don't have access to the same level of service. and support. But poverty really is a linchpin that keeps survivors trapped and unable to access the resources that they need. But given the fact that we are dealing with a population of survivors that isn't monolithic, right? Like Maria spoke about the experience of being an immigrant and also a survivor and struggling to find footing here because additional issues of systemic oppression or an experience of being an oppressed person or a minoritized person conflates the issue, right? It compounds everything. And I think that for many survivors, that's the case. It's like if there was a wheel of oppression, you could spin it and point your finger to something and it'll fall on something that applies to you. So panelists, in thinking about that and the fact that we aren't dealing with a survivorship that's monolithic, can you share the details of the interventions that you've developed and how they specifically speak to the survivorship that you're looking to impact, change, and shift with? And we'll start with Vibha. Oh, you're on mute, Vibha.
Thanks, Sarah. It's great questions, and let me begin by answering them in the following way. We know that the essence to help women come out of the hole that they might be stuck in for whatever reason, whatever challenges they might be facing, and we all face them at some level or the other. The first and primary goal has to be to expand their capabilities. It has to be to expand their sense of the space that they're in, to make sure they have more time, more energy, more autonomy, more freedom to be themselves. And that also means that we need to expand capabilities, but also deliver opportunities to the women. So how can women benefit from greater opportunities? How can they be encouraged to take advantage of those opportunities that might actually be essential for escaping that poverty, the situation of poverty, or escaping the trap of poverty, if you like. And I think for that, it's important to think about in terms of what I call the courtyards of sisterhood. So it's not just about, it should not just be about helping a few random women or even 1 million random women or, a billion women to escape poverty, but really to create communities of support amongst the women so they can support each other. And that's absolutely essential because women, we all know from our personal experience, Maria, thank you for sharing your experience. We all know the value and the importance of communities in our lives, communities of support, communities of friends, communities of relatives, neighbors that sort of help prop us up. And so thinking in terms of expanding capabilities, but doing it through the lens of building communities becomes important. So that captures, Sarah, the point that you made about the diversity and the fact that we're dealing with, we might be dealing with, women who are facing multiple challenges, not just one challenge of being poor. So having communities of support becomes important to address all those various challenges. And it's not a matter of doing one or the other first. It's about creating those supports systems and creating those communities. I call them courtyards of sisterhood, to help encourage women to feel more empowered, to feel more confident, and take advantage of opportunities and gain skills and expand their capabilities. I'll stop.
I love that. Yeah, thank you, Vibha. Balorma?
Yes, definitely. I can echo, all these comments, because it's not just about, giving the money or about, training. Alone, it seems like it's a lot of effort, which most of the time just sort of disappears if you do it not in a holistic way, right? So our organization does not work as sort of like a really like a center for violence or victims of violence. We don't do that. We actually try to support NGOs which work with such victims of gender, or actually we work in neighborhoods where poverty is actually very prevalent, right? So when we do just training, people stop going, because at one point or another they're so busy, they need to earn money, that put the bread on the table, right? So just training doesn't work. Then you have to actually provide the skills, as it was mentioned by Maria. People need skills, so you combine those trainings which provide really useful skills together with the sort of small grants to acquire also the tools. Without tools, just training doesn't work. So we actually combine those things, but more importantly, it has to be the community which sort of develops around the issue by themselves. So what we do is that we actually create a set of mentors within the community. We select all those mentors, we train those mentors, and those trained mentors continue to work and provide the support. And I think they speak also probably better language than we do. For example, we are advisors, we are, sort of more, we bring, sometimes we don't know what exactly works, but when you train the mentors from the community, they know exactly what the pinpointed, let's put it that way, right, training should be and how they should work out. We have big government support for, albeit not so effective, but still, there is a network of government support. But to access that government support, they have to register, they have to do a lot of things. And most of the time, when you bring a woman to and tell them about it, most of the time they're embarrassed to say that they never use the computer. They never know how to apply it online. They don't know what to ask, And so actually we had our mentoring session right next to the government offices, which provide such services, right? So they will first go to the government office and they will come back and they'll say, we didn't understand anything. So you have to decipher the whole bureaucratic processes and et cetera, help them to navigate, even show what is the mouse and how to find it through the cursor and find the necessary help, right? So these, unfortunately, when we talk about the trainees, most of the time people assume we can just go train them financial literacy and et cetera, but it's really about how much do you earn, what goes into your house expenses, what do you need for next year, what your sons needs and what your husband needs, So it becomes more like a family budget discussions. And then we also try to bring a lot of men within the community. So when you have actually not just women's discussion and have a more sort of like an inclusive discussion, then suddenly things start to shift. And then the biggest sort of like how to say validation comes at the end of the training, when you start to see communities coming together. They're creating voluntarily on their basis cooperative. They start to develop their own set of sort of like a safety net, right? And then they come up with their own initiative. All you have to do is really support those initiatives to flourish, and then you need to continue supporting them, not just leave once the project is over, right? So continue. I think hope is very extremely important. And then when we talk to these communities, we always talk how to break a cycle. We remind them you can't remain in a poverty unless you actually give education to your kids, right? For a single mom, for victims of violence, it's very difficult to obtain new skills, to be honest. They're constantly worried about how to put the bread on the table, how to feed the children, hungry children, etc. But they're always willing to send their kids to get better skills, work with obtain those skills, so that because they need to break through the circle, I think. And that's what we also try to bring. So what we've done is that, for example, we actually had another complementary training for kids to learn coding skills, right? So IT coding. I'm sure that without training, they're not going to immediately to find a job or get employed. That's given, right? Because given the resources, but what's important is that once the kids start to understand, they have more, for example, opportunities in gaining better skills, suddenly you see a change in entire family. Family becomes hopeful, more actually. So it's always like we are here just to support, but the solutions, it seems like through our work, is within the community themselves. All you need to do is listen carefully and provide such necessary support, because every community, again, as you mentioned, is different. Every issues within those things are different. When you talk about really like gender violence, people need to skip the run away from the homes and etc. Then you have to have like a lot of different level of support. But if they're like in a level when there is no money and poverty hits in, and then people start to sink into this violence and all these things, and it becomes like a little bit very hopeful, hope sort of like fades away. That's where I think we are most effective. And if we can break that and then help to sort of like support the next generation, but as well as create this environment of positive change. It's not about the money, to be honest. It's not about like skills. It's after all about I'm not alone. I can do it together, and there is help for us to achieve those goals. I felt like just based on my pragmatic interventions within those communities.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I want to, because I think Viba and Balorma, you guys offered such great answers. Just want to kind of like capture the key points. So Viba, you're mentioning expanding, providing opportunities for women to engage in some type of service that expands their capabilities, that actually provides them access to the opportunities, right? Because that's a really, really big thing. And the importance of community in supporting those efforts. Balorma, you mentioned it can't just be about training. It can't just be about money. And even in the absence of violence towards the population, I think we're providing these interventions because we also know that what the individuals we're serving have going on for them is not even an effective way of working, right? Like you talked about being more inclusive around how we're sharing information about how economic empowerment can end up helping the family, which means we have to include men and partners in the conversation, right? And also that these barriers that clients face, whatever they are, provide external and internal pressure that can buckle any individual, like it can make any individual buckle. So it's important to think about as we're providing these interventions that they be holistic and that take into account that we're not just dealing with an individual, we're often dealing with the caregiver, and what is the assistance we're also offering to their children and dependents to make sure that economic mobility and stability is actually a viable option for them. Okay, Maria.
Thank you so much. So yeah, for me is I want to make echo to the last one. And yes, I think we need more connections with other providers, other organizations, institutions like college. I wasn't know about I can get some certification, no matter if I was undocumented. But the people can get a certification, but with the time they get a residential or visa or something, or the legal status. So I think we need more like that. And also I know, for example, the biggest store, I want to mention one. I hope so I will in trouble for that. For example, Macy's, I know they support in different ways, right? But maybe they can give the opportunity to some survivors to work in that places. So I don't know, I think that connections maybe can help to the people to get a better job, to get a better income, and and support the families.
So at APNEOP, we have a very specific intervention method. We call it the 10 asset approach. So we have these communities, primarily in India, where we house a lot of the women that we work with, the young women and girls. So our first priority is to provide them with a safe space, both physically and mentally, so that they're free to, first of all, explore themselves and really enjoy their youth. We next provide education services, because education is the way to economic prosperity, to learning about how to go forth in the world. And we also provide, well, we can't really provide this, but we encourage self-confidence. Recently, we've implemented Kung Fu classes so that the women and girls can really feel their bodies and understand how powerful they are inside, because part of fighting such a horrible industry is knowing that you can rely on yourself. We also promote political power. So we try to promote legislation changes, constitutional changes. Apnea has been very successful with that in India. We provide government authorized identity cards so that the women have access to legally be in certain places that will promote them and help them in the workforce and different services. Next, we have low cost food, housing, and healthcare. For obvious reasons, this is very important. They need to not only be healthy, but be free from worry of anything they may have contracted during their time in the service, or provide for their children, provide for their husbands, et cetera, et cetera. We provide legal support to help them with their legal woes, to help them get out of any legal issues they may have incurred while they were in the service. We provide access to their own bank accounts, which is very important for just economic independence and financial stability. We also provide livelihood linkages, and we also call it kind of a 9 friends or membership of self-empowerment, which is just creating a group of girls and other women that they can rely on, so they aren't so essentially lonely. So as many of our other panelists have mentioned, our approach is centered on community building and cultivation, and just creating those communities of support for the women that we work with.
That's awesome. I think what I'm kind of like laughing about in my head is the fact that 4 different panelists have mentioned community in 4 different ways. It still comes. So Maria, you had mentioned kind of like leveraging the nonprofit industrial complex. Like if we're connected to organizations as the entities serving survivors, then we should be thinking about the way that we can leverage all the connections that we have to meet the needs of those survivors, right? No one, you're not going to get in trouble for mentioning Macy's. We still love Macy's. EP still gets suits from Macy's. That's okay. But thinking about the ways that we can grow the access to the opportunities, building the pathways to those opportunities. And sometimes that means reaching out to organizations you're already connected to who have contextualized how they want to work with organizations like ours or yours. But we also have a responsibility to kind of stretch their understanding about the impact that they can make. I had another note. The idea of building safe spaces, focusing on education for young girls. In EEP, we have something similar where we call it belief systems development, where we want to focus on empowering individuals personally, financially, but then also letting them know that they can use their voice and their not newfound, because I think the power is within all of us, but the newly accessed power to then kind of like draw out pathways for other individuals that come after them to then, access opportunities by way of income attainment, right? So inviting individuals who have gone through programming to then provide an employment opportunity or an internship opportunity for another person who's now just kind of like newly joining the program or training is very, very important. And I think speaks to, again, as you mentioned, Taylor, the importance of community kind of like at this individual level, but also, as you mentioned, Maria, at this larger organizational and systemic level, right? Because the systems that we interact with that provide these internal and external barriers are so fractured. They are not connected, right? And the only way to address the healing, the building of hope, the access to opportunities is to kind of like repair those connections. Awesome. Okay. Next question. So when we think about, now that we've talked about the interventions that that all of our organizations offer, I wanted to shift to thoughts around gaps in the field, and wanted to hear your thoughts on the fact that, you know, oftentimes the work that many of our organizations do are reactive in nature. You know, so you see a problem and then you build an intervention and you focus on that intervention. But we know that problems, you know, where they are when we begin to intervene, we know that things didn't begin there, right? There's always a core, a root of the issue. So I'd love to hear from the panelists, you know, what your thoughts are on developing more proactive interventions with respect to this issue in helping women, families, survivors. We can hear from Balorma first.
Sure. I think this is very, to be honest, I don't think I always have a feeling we are not doing enough for victims of violence, for women in vulnerable situations, for vulnerable community. To be honest, the money that we are working as a donor organization, and actually in our interventions, we always try to find a way of leveraging, you know, all the possibilities of trying to scale up the opportunity, right? So, for example, what we've done is that when we met with the safe house, you know, safe houses for victims of, you know, violence and etc. The first thing they said, we need skills, right? So what skills can be made available? And then we worked with the small community or cooperative, which makes all these handmade tools and etc. etc. So we asked them to train, you know, ladies in that safe house. Once they learn it, then we actually connect it to a network which sells those products and etc. etc. In another case, we actually worked with a group of women to help them to sort of like create a cooperative so that they can provide their products to larger also women-led companies, because women-led companies seem to be much more empathetic, to be honest, in helping out in this situation. But the feeling I always left is, you know, the funding is not enough. The money, the support that we provide is not enough. So I think we need actually to create, the biggest gap is, I think, in my opinion, is really public awareness of these situations, public awareness of this, why we need to help, why it's not just because somebody is violent, it's really rooted in poverty, right? How we can work to reduce the poverty, raise the issue of sort of like increasing poverty, you know, for many reasons. Just the COVID hits immediately the vulnerable population. Instead of being vulnerable, they suddenly sank into the sort of like the next level of poverty, right? So I think public awareness in such cases is very, in my opinion, is quite important, right? So we work with all sorts of different people because, you know, we will also work with the founders of companies, you know, tech companies and etc. And there was actually a social game which was showing actually pains of girl being trafficked, and then surprisingly, I was like, how you can talk about such a vulnerable thing through game, right? So I just couldn't comprehend until I saw it, right? And until I saw it, I saw all the comments within the community. I saw how many people actually start to understand what people go through, right? What human trafficking means, what does it mean, right? So there are so many things that, and in my opinion, people just need to be aware that we need to help. There is a communities like that, and we need to help. Most oftentimes people think it's just the government's job to help them, or some NGO's job to help them, right? But we need to bring this awareness of this is such a wide spread problem, not just in developing countries. You mentioned New York, you mentioned so many different countries that if more like not just government and NGOs, but private organizations, people start to understand the depth of these issues, I think we may be able to get much more support to help victims of and that's just my personal observation, to be honest, because I'm not the academic, and I honestly speaking, I might be saying but that's what I felt. We just need more sort of like a help coming towards vulnerable population, and we need to speak all the time about this. And I'm very grateful that you're having this discussion in this panel.
Thank you for that. I have so many thoughts, but I'm going to give space to the panelists to speak first. Maria, your thoughts on gaps. You've kind of spoken to this a little bit, so if you can elaborate.
Yeah, that Bolorma
Olorma.
mentioned it. I don't know. For me, my dream is to buy my own home, right? So we need to more connection with that, because any people can buy a home in New York City, for example, right? No matter with ITIN number, social security number, they can buy a home. But we didn't know about that. And we didn't know the process. We didn't have credit, right? So thank you, Sanctuary for Families, because they opened my bank account, my first bank account, without social security number. So I am very thankful. I continue with this bank because I say, I appreciate it, because that gives the opportunity to different communities in different ways, right? So thank you for that. And yeah, also we need more education about domestic violence, because in some places, when we say, okay, I am a survivor, I feel like, oh, I'm so sorry, Maria. Don't say sorry. Say, I am be proud you be here. Right? So we need more education, workshop about relationship. I know in some school or some parties, they don't want to give these workshops about healthy relationship, about sexuality, about domestic violence, because they say, oh, this is not my case, this is not passing my home, but we need more educated. Also, any people in the world, we need to more about the different situation we live in when we are survivors. Sometimes in some places, we don't feel safety. I want to mention something in my situation. I worked in Rikers Island. I give some workshops to the people incarcerated, but I don't feel very safe, because when they close the doors, my flashback come to me, right? And I don't know, was so terrible for me. I had a good experience to be there with these people, but I don't feel very safe. So it's important, we spoke out, we educate, and if the survivors feel comfortable, feel safe, they can share their testimony. because it's very important for others, because sometimes we don't want to speak out. We are afraid. So when we hear the other people speak about the situation, say, oh, this is my situation. Can I share with you? So we will identify with the other people.
Mhm. Thank you for that, Maria. Taylor, why don't you go and then we'll hear from Deba if you have thoughts about this.
Okay, well, I think everyone actually just hit it on the nail. It is the lack of understanding and lack of awareness of the situation. I've tried to speak to several people about this issue, and there's just like a wall between us. They just don't understand what the issue actually is and what causes it. So yeah, just more awareness of the issue, more education around it, listening to survivors. Obviously, funding will help. Money is unfortunately for better or worse, a good way to help our survivors and really make sure they have a better way of living. Also, political changes are necessary. Sign bills, legislature about protecting survivors and preventing it from occurring ever again in the future. I think the reason why most of our work is so reactive is because these systems have been in place for hundreds of years before us, before OPNAOP, before any of our organizations have existed, and we're just working to undo all of the issues that have been caused.
No, it's a great point. It's a great point, Taylor. Viba, did you have thoughts about gaps in the field? You're just on mute.
Okay, let me try and draw it because your answers that I got, the three answers were just so fabulous. So I'm going to try and draw on them and expand on it. I think the first big takeaway about gaps is that the problems seem at a systemic level unsurmountable. It's just, it never ends. It's, it sort of seems like, I have colleagues who've been working in this field, and one colleague in particular wrote a paper sometime back, which was, we've spent time advising governments and advising nonprofits and advising international aid organizations, and yet 5 years later, we're doing the same thing. We're making the same suggestions all over again. And she wrote this paper, and she said, when does that change? When do the systemic issues get addressed? Why is it that, what all of us can do in our nonprofits can help a certain number of people, but why is it that we're not able to transform the bigger issues? And I think for that, it's important that one of the background papers for the conference, the CSW68 conference, was called looked at the international monetary and financial systems and looked at how those need to be changed. And I think one way of thinking about that change, I mean, the paper was sort of academic and I could discuss it, but rather than discuss it, let me just tell you what I think should do and why it's relevant for all of us in this conversation. So I was meeting with a company, a French company, Sodexo. You guys might have heard about it. I was meeting with them, with their procurement person in Paris sometime back. And I was trying to tell him that, you guys procure table linen, materials for your different cafeterias that you run in 140 different countries around the world. Let me create workspaces where women in those communities can manufacture, can make those aprons, can make those tablecloths, can make the napkins and so on, and you buy it from them. And I will take it on myself to train the women to make that possible. All you have to do is place an order and buy these products and use them. And he looked at me and he said, yeah, but these women you're talking about, they're all uneducated. They're not, many of them may not be literate, and they've not been trained. They're not professionals. And I sort of looked at him and I said, the women that I work with, the biggest driver, the biggest motivating factor they have, and this is, Maria, you mentioned this, is that they need to take care of their children. And the children are the biggest driver. So it beats any supervisor, it beats any HR system you have in place. You know, when the mother is sort of dealing with a child saying, Mom, go work more. I need to buy more books for school. I really like that. Oh my God, as mothers, you'll kill yourself to do whatever it takes. And I don't think these international monetary systems and whatever, I don't think they understand this. And so our goal, I think our collective goal has to be to transform that mindset, to talk more about it. Because yes, I want to train our women and the women in my network and at Ubuntu and help them become more powerful, be able to bargain with the patriarchal challenges they face and, you know, the abusive husbands they deal with and so on. But it's more, I want them to have these global opportunities. And for that, we have to start this conversation. It has to not be a courtyard of sisterhood at the local level, but a sort of a global courtyard of sisterhood where we take on these large companies and say, no, the drive, and let me also explain that this whole issue of companies focusing on greed rather than, you know, what drives and the care economy, which is really, so it's not the care economy, which should be separate, but the care economy should be the driver. Caring for children, I mean, they are the next generation. If we don't support them, then, you know, I don't see the point of anything out there, right? And so this care economy, this is not something that didn't occur in the past. It did occur in the past. In ancient history, there were communities where women were in charge and were running and driving the economic programs, the economic initiatives, if you like. And what we're dealing with, this sort of the institutional and systemic misogyny that we deal with, is relatively new. But we have to recognize it and not say that we are the ones responsible. We are not responsible for that. The women aren't responsible for that. The survivors aren't responsible. But collectively, we have to push back and transform the conversation to say that this global economy that sort of shapes us, that drives us, that creates barriers and challenges for us, that has to be driven by care, concerns of care, and not concerns of greed. And that just has to be a conversation to be had. And I will just end with this. I remember Senator Warren, Elizabeth Warren from Massachusetts, a few years back when I think it was in 2021, she proposed these very interesting bills where she didn't talk about any of the sort of the issues I'm talking about in using the words that I use, like courtyard of sisterhood or the care economy or, you know, the systemic misogyny, without talking about, because, you know, if she talks about it, she'll be hounded out of the Senate. But but all those, but she tried to come up with interventions, childcare interventions, food support interventions, community support interventions that could start transforming this global economy. And we need to do that. So just, I'll give you an example, a simple issue of childcare, right? I mean, rather than then the government offering, and we're talking about the wealthy United States government, I'm not even talking about childcare issues in other parts of the world, rather than the federal government giving women below a certain income level a tax break, or giving them a cash transfer to say, here's money for childcare expenses. And that money, the woman goes and puts that money into this national corporate venture capital funded chain of childcare, you know, where so you go and put that money there and the child is taken care of, but the money is no longer in the community. The woman is just basically a conduit for the federal government giving money to these companies. Instead, imagine if we had courtyards of neighborhood groups that ran childcare centers, and the money that the federal government gave actually stayed within the community. And women sort of managed it, and it was a community of neighbors and sisters, and by sisters, I mean, quote, in quotes, of course, they have to be sisters. Imagine if we could think about how our community of care could transform the economy that is suffocating so many millions and millions and billions of people today. Okay, I'm going to stop.
Yeah, if I
That
can.
was that. Go ahead. Yes, definitely, Balorma. Go ahead.
Sorry, if I can just add to what has been discussed. we had a very small grant during COVID from Asian Development Bank. I think they looked into some of the pockets and they found a tiny grant for us, right? But with that money, what we've done is that we actually went and negotiated with the government, the SME support organization, to host our sort of women entrepreneurs or people who are wanting to become entrepreneur, to provide them a sort of like a, you mentioned, workspace, right? So in the obviously, you know, and unfortunately, of course, because of the economic circumstances and etc., violence most of the time happens in vulnerable communities, right? But exactly the vulnerable communities do not have community centers. They don't have, you know, workplaces to come and work and learn those skills, right? Even operate. And, you know, you need, so those are not very expensive support, you know, to be honest. They are not that, you know, you are not really breaking the federal budget with those small support, but they are very critical on creating this community. Once you have these community centers where you can go and learn their skills, but provided the tools, and then if you are sufficiently confident in yourself, you go on and set up your own company, that actually, or set up your little sort of like a home run shop. Those things seems to be working very well in our this small sort of like a, I would say, experience with this grant, right? So now we are working with the municipality of our city to expand that program, continue that program, and more importantly, you see that, for example, in our trainings, because we offered them to get the job place, because we offered them an opportunity to become the owner of a small businesses, men suddenly started to get involved. So now all of a sudden the training is not just for women, but including all the family members, right? And we remember we had one training on life balance, on how to, you know, use tools to reduce your stress and etc. And one of the participants, who was a man, he actually said, you know, I use that in my home after your teaching. Usually I come home very angry, he said, very angry, frustrated, you know, no money, no, you know, nothing seems to be not happening. And usually what happens is that I have two small children and I start to sort of yell at them and become a bit abusive behavior. But he said, I actually used that technique that you taught us, and I was able to sort of, you know, contain my anger. And he said the whole family felt happy because I started becoming happier, right? So it really has to target the entire community, and the solutions usually within the community. We can't impose anything. We can say whatever we want to. Most of the time they are not fitted to the needs of the community, right? So Maria mentioned about working on this, you know, on the washing, and then she doesn't feel comfortable, and that's her response. So that's not the best intervention. You know, we need to listen to the community to find and fine-tune all these sort of like tools for intervention, in my opinion. And it has to be very sort of like you know, hopefully a very holistic and comprehensive, you know, addressing children needs, addressing, you know, partners needs, everything.
Yep, fabulous points, fabulous points. So many key takeaways. I think that, you know, even the barriers that you face in developing these interventions, the gaps that you'll see in the services, it all is so entrenched. I remember once we went to an organization to talk about an internship program, and one of the individuals asked, well, what do we do about like the safety risks, right? Because it seems like an unsafe thing to bring on individuals who are survivors of domestic violence and to bring them into our safe corporate spaces. And I said, you do know that like 1 in 4 women, maybe 1 in 3 women, 1 in 7 men have experienced violence in a relationship. You have people working here, ma'am, who are survivors. And for whatever reason, I think it has to do with how people process trauma, even before they've experienced trauma, right? There is this idea and sense that like a survivor, a victim, is separate and apart from somebody who doesn't understand it, when actually this is an issue of justice and anyone is vulnerable to this violence, and it just takes the right, confluence and alignment of the stars for then someone who never ever thought about being a survivor to become a survivor. And public awareness is the way to grow a sense of that. I also think, the more that any of us can do to build trauma-informed worlds, relationships, people will draw on that and transfer it to their experiences and interactions with other people in their lives, because trauma is a scary thing. It's scary to experience it. It's scary to think about it. Most people don't want to think about it. And it does create these pockets of understanding and misunderstanding where the work that we're all doing seems very lofty. And people talk about the work that we do like we're clergy, somehow disconnected from the world that everyone else experiences, because we're engaging with individuals that people don't want to think about and engaging with experiences that people don't want to think about. When the truth is that we're not separate and apart. Anyone could be in the position of being a survivor. It's time for Q&A. So we're going to open it up to the audience in real life, IRL, as well as the questions that we have online. So feel free to raise your hand if you have a question for any of the panelists who have spoken today, or if you just want to share a gem about something that you heard today too, that's welcome. Yes. Mm.
Yes, thank you for the question. I'm not sure if they continue to do that, but it's TD Bank.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and I don't remember exactly who accompanied to me to the bank and
I think I
explain.
remember.
You
It wasn't
okay.
but I think I remember. So that
Yeah.
program actually right now that we established, I think someone in EEP a long time ago spoke to someone at Sanctuary, who then spoke to someone at TD Bank, who was the manager at the time, who was like, you know what, we will make some allowances for the fact that you have individuals who are receiving stipend checks from programming. And if you can vouch for them and they can come with some form of ID, even without a social, you can get a bank account. Here's the thing about interventions like that. They are very, very specific to the people that want to take risks in doing something that's that progressive. So what we've encountered now is a new manager who is like, this is up for review. But what we are working on, I think, under the auspices of us trying to increase access to economic mobility for all of the clients that we're serving at Sanctuary, we've actually created a short list of banks that are like Black and minority owned that have much more progressive protocols around who they are willing to offer banking opportunities to. So we can exchange information, and I'd love to work with connecting your clients to whatever we're able to develop. Because we actually just came up with the idea to expand when we found that some of our opportunities dried up. Yeah.
Can I say something?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, but thank you so much for you be here. And I want to express something in my experience. I don't know, maybe the EE program is changing the protocols, and the people can be part of the group. But I applied it 2 times, and I didn't can have the opportunity to be part of the EE. I know it's some restriction. At that time, I didn't have my GD. So I finished it. But yeah, because, some of us, we don't have the opportunity to have a professional development or professional education at the countries or here. But, we want to have different things. We want to be a professional to help the other communities, the other survivors, so just only that.
Mhm. No, it's a great point. And I think in the past, there were a lot of restrictions placed on who could join the program. A lot of it, unfortunately, had to do with funding and how, in that, I know, right? And the awareness of the individuals and organizations that are funding the programming to understand that everybody wants an opportunity, and we have to work not to create more barriers to connecting people to opportunity, right? So now, over time, we've been able to expand the number of people who are undocumented who can do the English-speaking economic empowerment program offerings, expanded how many people can do the Spanish-speaking economic empowerment programs offerings. So really thinking about, as Balorma said, focusing on being more client-centered, because as Viva said, these individuals who want to do this work, they will find a way to income attainment, and then they will raise their daughters, their sons, their grandchildren, their second cousins out of the obscurity that poverty creates. And all of that is to the benefit of the community. So it's a great point. It's definitely become a lot more inclusive. I'm going to take one question from the Zoom, and then I'll pop it back into the audience. I think someone asked, how can we increase economic stability for undocumented survivors who do not have legal work authorization to work?
Resources, maybe about certification, maybe now the COPs. Yeah, so I think this is the best way. Now I know in some places they get the people with only the eating number. So maybe we can have the information and connect with these places. The cook program that mentioned, is for all people, no matter immigration status. So yeah, but it's very important the people know about the rights first, because if not, we suffer different things, trafficking. When I was a housekeeper, they pay me $10 per hour or less. I was a waitress and I earned $20 a day, 12 hours, 11 to 11. So that is impossible. So we are human, and we need to have the right payment. So, but yeah,
right. So so access to, it sounds like more entrepreneurship, also knowledge of your rights.
Yes.
And the fact that people can be independent contractors even without a social security number, right? So I think there are non-conventional pathways to income attainment that we need to make ourselves more aware of and provide more training on. Balorma and Vib, I see you guys nodding your heads in agreement, which is good. Okay, now from the audience.
Hi, everyone. This was so good and informative. Sarah, I loved when you gave the example when you went to that farm that you had to educate this person on what is DV, right? In what ways and other ways have you been able to educate people about the stigma about domestic violence? Because that creates barrier, not only for employment, but when they're looking for housing, when we have to educate landlords on the client's rights, right? And when they're searching for apartments, like, I don't want this in my building, or when clients are already placed in housing and they're being discriminated against because now there was, abuser came and they're being evicted, right? Illegally by these landlords. So how programs can educate more people on what is DV and removing all these stigma that there is about domestic violence?
That's a great question. I think that it's a scaling issue, right? You have to be in the spaces where people who hold the power over our survivors are, to then be able to give them information that broadens their sense or helps them build a sense. Sometimes they're not even there, builds or broadens their sense about one, the fact that anyone really can find themselves in a situation like this. Is not about poor people being the ones who are survivors, right? Like, the experience of poverty and the experience of domestic violence or gender-based violence, they conflate, but it's not like one causes the other. And I think, a lot of people don't consider that. And that goes back to the public awareness issue, right? That if people aren't aware, if we don't feel free to talk about this with, everyone that we know, even in our own personal circles, right? Because every single one of us is in the position to be an advocate. We have to maintain our accountability to that when, someone you're speaking to wants to brush it off as, oh, you're doing this, amazing work, right? It's the highest calling. You got to bring it back down to earth and say, but someone who's a survivor, because if you have 4 friends, one of them has experienced this, right? And that's for every single one of us. So I think that it can start on a very individual level, but then as organizations, we have to be strategic about how we are broadening our reach and even reaching out to organizations that you wouldn't even think might need the service. I feel like EEP has done a lot of outreach in this last fiscal year, just by cold calling organizations to say, these are all the things we offer: services, internships, people who could be employees, and people get to pick and choose what it is that they ask for in return. And you can work in the knowledge into any presentation you do about anything. And everyone will leave the table feeling a little more informed and a little more aware. Did anybody else want to add to that? Yeah, go for it. Here, just.
Thank you. So to your question, I think I'm a strong believer in the power of education. And I think a lot of students at schools are facing these issues, or their parents maybe, a friend maybe. So I do believe that we need to start implementing in coursework courses about domestic violence, or at least mentioning it, that domestic violence, sex trafficking, things of this nature. As a college student, I have seen that there are courses available, and I do believe they're picking up. So, I mean, that's good to see. But yes, I think we need to start educating people from a very, very young age about these issues. Yes.
We do have a program that is called RAP and Early RAP.
Yes.
That definitely goes into the public schools and educate the youth, right? So in letting them know how important it is to be in a healthy relationship and to kind of identify what is not healthy. So definitely, I agree when you say the youth had to be educated.
RAP also has individuals placed in schools, right? Social workers
Yes,
placed in
actually,
schools.
they have about I think they are in about 120 something schools already. So definitely it's something that works great because I have my children, unfortunately, they're not in my children's school, but I have one in middle school. And the stuff that they bring about, they talk about, you know, these kids as young as 10 years old, they're talking about having boyfriends and girlfriend. And it's amazing how, you know, sometimes the parents are not even aware of it. So the rap and early rap is something that needs to be, I think, in every single school.
Definitely. Yes, Balorma, go ahead.
Yeah, just one quick comment. I actually, when Maria mentioned about, you know, when you go and you have to say, I am actually a survivor, and hence I'm stronger and much more. I think a lot of times this, when we talk about public awareness, we always talk about sort of like downsides, and most of the time people view as victims, and it's our human nature, you know, we always like winners, you know, to be honest, right? So I think we need to also, survivors also need to have this opportunity to talk about themselves, how they become stronger, how they become better, and hence you can sort of like bring me into your community, bring me into your building because of what I've witnessed, and I just come out stronger. And that message seems to be kind of missing, and that's why I think it's hurting a bit more public awareness, why we need to help more. When you go to talk to ask for donation, let's put it that way, right? So there are a number of priorities on giving the donation to certain organizations, and somehow donations for domestic violence survivors actually always on the bottom of the list. And the reason, I think, in my opinion, is that people feel like, okay, we put donations, but what will happen? I'm sorry. Will there be any positive change coming out, right? So I think from that perspective, I think we also need to slightly change the narrative and say that survivors actually come out stronger, much more equipped with deal wherever the life throws at them, right? And that kind of, it could be just a little bit naive, but that's what I felt like maybe we need to also bring into this discussion.
That's an amazing point. It's an amazing point.
Hi, thank you to all the panelists. And actually, I have a question, but just before I even maybe ask that question, just from the point that was brought up before, I'm just wondering how that works. I think there's something about being frail, victim, that's tied into femininity. I need your help, and so I'm here to help you. And then on the flip side, if you're strong, it's almost like, here it is on your shoulders, like you got this, and it's been done to women over time. So it's almost like this double whammy if you think particularly about what it means to be a woman, and then who we help, who we don't help, what one is supposed to look like, and how, you know, that plays out in reality. But my question really was, or maybe just more like a comment / question, and just asking for your thoughts on this. With dealing with organizations, I almost wonder if, like, to some extent, we need to be marketers, as opposed to, I get education, I get awareness, this is what I do, I'm also a survivor, but I'm going to flip it a little bit, right? So, oh, please sponsor us, please fund us. Well, maybe especially right now, right? Like organizations, if they're tied to social causes, it's like, okay, buy Tom's shoes, you just help a child go to school, right? So if you want to be associated with, like, you know, you're backing women, and it could be survivors, it doesn't have to be, right? But you want to be tied to those issues, then this is what you provide. You provide internships, now you get to say it. TD Bank or whatever other bank, they're offering, right, $300 if you're opening up a bank account. All right, great. So now you're going to not only allow, right, for someone to open up a bank account, but you're also going to give them the $300 if they deposit X, Y, and Z. And then you could also claim that social, you know, however you want to play into it, right? That you're supporting social justice, that you could place a plaque, right? So like reframing it, like you were talking about the person with, you know, the aprons and you know, they said no, like, what do these women know? So kind of done pleading, done trying to explain that these women are worth something, they know what they're doing. Here's what it is. You want to be known as this in the community and a supporter of this. And then through time, they're also going to see, right, by having the aprons look beautiful or having the production take place and be able to be like, the first proud supporters. Maybe someone else will follow in their footsteps. And that's just something that kind of came to mind as we were talking about it. And I understand that probably most people in this room did not go, or I should say some, did not go into like this accidentally or willingly to be marketers of anything, but it's really flipping the switch. And it's like, this is what you have to do to be allowed to just fund and then claim whatever you want to claim, like not whatever you want to claim, right? Because I do think awareness is great. I do think education is great. But we're also living in a culture. We just had the Super Bowl in Vegas. We know Super Bowl is like what brings in sex trafficking and human trafficking. And how many people like, think or talk about this. So it's all great, right? To keep pushing. But what do we need to really get things done and then really have that impact where through experience, we have the people on our side like, no, we hire these women. These are the best aprons, they're the best workers. You want? Okay, I could see if they have a friend, right? So what your thoughts on that are?
Sarah, hello?
My thoughts first? Yes, go ahead. You can go first. Yes.
Sarah, so the great question, and I think I think our attempt should be the following. I think nonprofits of various sorts, and I think we need to stop worrying about, well, do you provide this kind of service or that kind of service, and how can we partner? So I think those nonprofit partnerships need to be much more generalized and much stronger. And I think we need to not settle when we talk to these companies for chicken feet. I don't think we should settle for, give me a few $100s here or help the women here. No, I think that we should have big asks here. And the big asks go in line with, their shareholder policies and how they deal with their stocks. And so I think I think it's a marketing effort. I think we need to absolutely go there, but we need to do it in a way that's not, just like there's greenwashing and there's brownwashing. It shouldn't be, pink washing of some sort. It should really be, we need to get serious change in the systems that drive this poverty, that keep this poverty going. And we need to start having those conversations. And it can't be, we can't settle. We just can't, because we'll be doing this, for the rest of our lives, and then our children will be too. And we need to break the cycle. And for that, we need to start having those conversations with these large entities, these financial, monetary entities. We need to start having serious conversations with them. And I wondered if I could answer one of the questions on Zoom, Sarah. This was a question about how have developing countries or activists within them been able to better negotiate working conditions for women in global economies that often feels like it's a race to the bottom. Well, I would say, here's what's interesting. Most developing countries, in my experience, have not been any more successful at dealing with the systemically and systematically than the advanced economies have been. I think what's different is that in poor countries in the global south, so when I go and work with women in rural Namibia, they are so poor that they are below the radar of the global economy. And so being below that radar and being having the Sodexo guy completely unconcerned about them, thinking them irrelevant, actually can work to their advantage, because they actually have more autonomous spaces to express themselves. And I think we need to learn from these poor women. We need to understand how these women below the radar are functioning, are making things happen. Maria, you made a point, I think, Sarah, and there was a conversation where you talked about how we need to learn about how people who are undocumented might be finding opportunities for economic success, right? And again, that's an example of people below the radar saying, well, we're going to figure out what we can do to make this work. And I think we need to learn from those experiences, not just learn to help other people in those categories, but learn in a more systematic fashion. I think it has valuable lessons for women in the US dealing with the Dobbs decision. It has women in Europe dealing with human trafficking issues that are so challenging there, much more so in the US, I think, in many ways. But I think we need to just hear more from women around the world. And I think we need to really hold the feet of large corporations to the fire.
I just wanted
Thank
to
you so
add,
much. Yeah, go ahead,
sorry.
Paloma.
Yeah, I think the previous question from the audience was exactly what I wanted to say when I talked about sort of like putting more positive image, or how to say, this is probably, I cannot, eloquently put it that way, but the power of positive, how to say, changes is so important. And also that helps us to also market the issue and then raise awareness, and through the awareness also raise sort of funding to support such women, right? So we actually work, our NGO is actually not to help, to be honest, we are not focused on women, how to say, on victims, but we work with the NGOs that work with. Our NGOs actually consist of all very powerful women owners, and we call ourselves Women Entrepreneurs Council. And that organization actually established an NGO, which is called Women Entrepreneurs Mentor Club. So because that council consists of all the women-owned businesses within our Chamber of Commerce and Industry, you have an access to all employers that willing to employ women who worked or subject to all these difficult life situations, right? So then you start to talk, because all these companies have a huge budget for marketing, but they have a very little budget for real social issues. So that's where you need to campaign it, then you need to create events, then you need to bring this issue among all other issues on an equal basis. Last year we had, every year we do actually organize something called Social Innovation Week, because we also support women in tech, right? So in that forum, we brought actually these young guys who were, as I mentioned, were creating a gaming about child trafficking. And that is such a very difficult subject. And everybody, whoever came to our meeting, their expression was like mine. How you can talk about it, how you can make a game about it, right? But once they start to learn what they've done, and that created such a huge awareness what the kids go through. And then in that game, you actually Samaritan, right? So you help that child to do all these tools and etc. etc. It's such a strange world, because probably for my generation it would be really weird to raise any awareness, but younger generations are not willing to listen about gender violence. They don't want to listen about gender violence. They don't want to listen about human trafficking, child trafficking. It's just so far, it seems to be so negative that they just want to close their ears, right? So we need to find the ways also to raise this public awareness through so many different ways. And that includes also positive images, positive sort of like awareness about women in that, and that actually helps to bring more support for women in need. That's philanthropy capital. You need to market for it. You have to make sure that issue is exactly on the same issue as any other issue on the social spectrum of things that companies need to support or willing to support.
Right. Great point. Great point. Okay, we have one more question from the audience, and then I'll open it up to the panelists for closing comments.
Great, thanks, Sarah. And thank you all for just really outstanding comments and very, very inspiring morning. My question is sort of at a 20,000 foot level. Palermo, I think you were the one who encapsulated that you can't address violence without addressing poverty. And I'm thinking about the tapestry of gender violence, anti-gender violence organizations that may or may not have an economic pathway component to what they do. And then the tapestry of anti-poverty organizations that may not have a gender violence lens. So how can we bridge those two sectors to work more, have more synchronicity and work more closely together?
The way I'm very pragmatic, I'm a businesswoman. Maybe that's sort of helps me to find some solutions, right? So when we talk, for example, and I always feel like women-owned businesses are much more willing to lend a hand to any social cause than any man-owned businesses. That's I just witnessed throughout all my career, all this, NGOs, fundraisings, and everything else, right? So I always rely on network of women who already have businesses, have opportunities to support, right? And then I find a mechanism that can help them to help. It cannot be just handouts. It cannot be just donation. It has to be something, because the tangible that can sort of like work on a very sustainable way. And the way we do it is we always start with the community of women in need, find out what they need, and then we provide them with skills and opportunities to showcase, right? It could be product, improvement of products, working together as a cooperative or anything. And once we have something to show to other parties, then we start to go our campaigning and going through our women entrepreneurs and say, look, this is the money they are asking, this is the product they have, this is how you can support. And you don't have to give it them, it's not just stopping there, because they can now, with your help, support, continue to support each other. We connect them also to other, for example, we connected a lot of women in our Gary area to our association of, women in textile. And now they are actually making clothes using the tools we provide, the connections we supported, and etc. We can't rely on the government. With the government, we discuss completely different things. First of all, we say, just don't give cash. Instead, create a community center. We say, just don't talk about it. Make sure that in your laws, you have a stipulation which says, as long as you're building something there, there has to be a community center. So with the government, we try to work on the legislative level, but with the private sector, which is always our biggest supporter, we always work through this is the example how it can be done. These are the skills. This is the community. You see how wonderful results they're producing. Now give your money, type of a situation. So it's a little bit difficult. There is no sort of like how to say, but I think being closer to that community and to the needs of, you mentioned many things like opening bank accounts, everything, right? So you need to first understand their very important needs and then try to tailor it. So unfortunately, I don't think there is a universal solution to that, but I think empathy is extremely important, and women owners usually provide in abundance such empathy. So that's where maybe we could start our sort of like a broader change for the, for this issue.
Great suggestions. Okay, panelists, I'm going to open it up for any closing comments, final thoughts you have.
Okay. I believe it was Miss Biba who used the word insurmountable. These issues of domestic violence, sex trafficking, they do seem insurmountable, like we'll never solve them, but I do believe in the power of a conversation. And as Chair taught me, half the battle is just acknowledging that it is an issue and that there needs to be a solution to it. So through conversations, we can create a strategy to solve these issues, and it just makes it a bit more manageable. Yours work?
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, that in this place mentioned it, we need more connections, more outreach, more education. The last week I worked with La Red de Pueblos, is an indigenous group, and they didn't know about Sanctuary for Families. So I don't know, but maybe we can connect in the zone meetings with other organizations. For example, Mojave Community Partnership, they doing a meeting one time a month. So maybe we can connect with them and we share information about the resources, the services that people can receive, because they can connect the clients or the services. And yeah, I think we need more speak out, we need more union with different cultures, different languages, but we need a union in the community for support each other.
Viba? I think you might be muted.
Sorry. I think the point that the previous speaker made about, seeing these problems as insurmountable is absolutely well taken, and I think a great point. And that's precisely my point, that because they're so unsurmountable, we have to talk about them, and we have to sort of not just talk in bubbles, in small pockets, but we have to have wider conversations. And not just conversations, we have to push to take it to the next level. We have to push, Baloroma, you talked about being a businesswoman. We have to push these companies to take it to the next business level. It's not just about giving out peanuts. It's not just about, and that if you do peanuts, it's going to stay insurmountable. And we have to imagine this future where it would not be insurmountable. And that's going to happen by two things. One, a lot of people talking, a lot of networks, and a lot of panels like this one, a lot of conversations like this, where different people from different segments of society come to listen. That's the first part. And the second part is we have to sort of demand absolutely real change, not peanuts. And if we're just going to look for peanuts, we'll be doing this all the time, and without, yes, some women might benefit, but lots of others will start falling into that same trap again. So we have to sort of stop the cycle of cycle of disempowerment. And we have to talk seriously about that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd
Balorma?
say the word discussion, talking to each other, that's a very valid and very important. This is, I would say, almost like a first step, right? So, and again, my advice is going to be a little bit more pragmatic, because I work with the government as well, and etc. And I'm a single mom. I raised 2 kids, right? So in New York City, and being actually kind of like an immigrant there as well. And so I've seen all these issues. But what I wanted to say is that, first of all, if you can actually come up with if you start discussing amongst yourself, what help do you need, right? And that how it can help you. And then once you sort of formulate that, you need to find the listening ears and people who can help you, right? Because talking to the government, it takes forever, to be honest. We are talking, and somebody mentioned about this research, the issue is never resolved, and etc., right? So governments can help, but the most pragmatic and important empowerment tools, economic, because the entire topic is about economic empowerment, it actually comes from the private sector. So you need to kind of like come up with the solution. And the reason I say so is that we always approached by people, and they bring all sorts of information. In fact, many of my companies are actually created because of all this, discussions, people will say, we need this, we need that. And then you feel like, all right, there seems to be something that we can help to do, right? So I think those discussions are very important for someone economically more empowered to help you, to help how to empower you economically. Is it the job? Is it the skills? Is it the tools, like equipment? What is it, right? Or is it maybe within your community, you already have that cooperative, you just want to sell your product to us, right? So when you have something very concrete, people are much more willing to support. So I think that can be a lot of discussions that, and of course, these panels like that help a lot, right? Because we can again raise awareness, and then, but we also need to talk about a lot about pragmatic steps on how to bridge this sort of like an economic gap between women in need and obviously, more economically empowered part of the population as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you to all of the panelists and what you offered here today. Could give them all a round of applause. And thank you to all who joined us in person and those who joined us on Zoom. I think we're all leaving this space with our minds racing about things that we can do to continue supporting our work and supporting survivors and supporting women. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a good afternoon. Get home safely.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And, hopefully we can have more discussions like this and continue to help each other.
More discussions like this are good. Definitely, definitely. Thank you all very, very much.